Give me liberty and give me Annette.
Thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, history, politics, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast is found on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Spotify, all the places you can find your podcasts. And if you want to see what we look like, go to youtube.com and type in Annette Talks, and you'll find us there. I recommend that. And right now, if you subscribe on YouTube, you'll be automatically entered to win a free 72-hour kit, so don't miss out. And today, first of all, I want to give you my Constitution minute because I'm doing this with every episode. Before I introduce the podcast, I just wanted to mention that the First Amendment includes a few important things that are missing in the country we're going to be talking about today. And one of those that we'll be discussing a little bit more at length is the right to assemble. And that's something that was missing in COVID. And it wasn't mentioned a whole lot by the government when they prevented us from assembling. But that's a huge, important right that I don't think people think about very often. We think about speech and we think about religion and we think about the press, but we don't think about the right to assemble very often. Well, that is extremely important, as we'll see as we go into the topic tonight, which is we're talking about the uprising that's happening in Cuba that started yesterday, which was July 11th. Today's the 12th, and it's still going strong. And so, fortunately, I already had built a relationship with my guest, who I'm going to now attempt to pronounce her name, Mylene Salabarria. How are you, Mylene?
You got it perfectly.
Excellent. I've been practicing my R's. My sister can speak Spanish, and she served a mission down in Venezuela, and she says that they're told that every human being has the ability to roll their R's. We just need to practice. So
practice makes perfect. Yes.
Gringas like me have to practice because it comes naturally to us. So for those of you that have been watching my podcast for a while and you saw the last time Mylene was on, you know that Mylene came here from Cuba in 2001, right? And so we were actually planning on podcasting this Saturday, but then this whole thing with Cuba happened and we both realized we needed to get to this sooner, much sooner. So I'm going to release this as a special episode very early in the week, unlike what I usually do. I usually release on Friday, but I'm going to release tonight if I can get it to upload to YouTube soon enough, or first thing tomorrow morning, which is Tuesday, the 13th. So since you lived in Cuba under the Castro regime, this has all got to be very exciting and scary for you to watch from America as you've got family and friends back there still. So first of all, tell us what's going on and how maybe you see it a little bit differently than those of us who've never lived there.
Well, I got to tell you, Annette, that in the past 24 hours, any person, not only in the United States, anywhere in the world that has any connection to Cuba, like emotions have been running really high in the past 24 hours. I didn't sleep much last night. I have friends both on the East and the West Coast that we have been monitoring social media, private message groups, WhatsApp groups, trying to get as much as we can out of Cuba. We have been basically nonstop translating all the captions and the information that comes from those messages, from those videos, from those pictures, and trying to put it out in our own channels on social media to help at least to be like a relay service for what's really going on in Cuba. And I'm telling you that we are witnessing right now something that is like historical. There is no precedent to what is going on in Cuba in the past 24 hours. Granted, there have been uprisings, people taking up the streets before. Back when I was in Cuba, we have the Maleconazo in 1994 when the Clinton administration ended up facing that rafter crisis that ended up with a lot of Cubans in refugee camps in Guantanamo Bay. But this is nothing like that. What happened with the Maleconazo in Cuba was something that the Castro government and the military crushed in a matter of hours right there in Havana, as opposed to what we have seen in Cuba happening in the last, I don't know, it's now like 48 hours. It has been more than 57 uprisings all over the island happening simultaneously. Well, you see generations of young Cubans that basically have been born and raised in these environments of total hopelessness. And they are telling us in their radio interviews, in their tweets, in their private messages, like, we really have nothing else to lose. Like, we have hit rock bottom. If I have to be the next body count on the street, I don't care.
Wow. So they are now at a point of desperation where they've got nothing to lose. And so they're taking to the streets because they would rather risk their lives than go on living the way they're living right now.
Exactly.
So what do you think is sparking this? Is it because of, I read that they have blackouts that are happening more frequently, that all of a sudden food is becoming more scarce because of the COVID restrictions preventing tourism from happening on the island? What do you think? What's sparking this right now?
I think it's a combination of several things, many of those that you have mentioned, but as opposed to what the mainstream media in the United States and other countries want to lead you to believe, this is not about vaccines. This is not about the lack of the scarcity of basic needs. Like, you guys have to understand that we have lived on this basic needs scarcity for 62 years. So that's the normal for us in Cuba. So obviously that's kind of like the boiling ground of the whole situation, and everything else adds up to it. Believe it or not, we have discussed how the whole coronavirus situation has shaped and changed the way that even here the United States has operated in the past year and a half. I would have never thought that for the situation in Cuba, it would have been actually the silver lining of being that spark that, finally removed the lid from the pressure cooker and let people get out and say, you know what, I don't care. I've had it. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen on my time. So it's been a combination of all that. And I think that, again, it's been building up all that scarcity and necessity with the tropical storm, with the whole COVID pandemic restrictions. The fact that the system is an abject failure that has not been able to provide what they promised that they were going to provide. I mean, the country has been in a pandemic situation for 62 years. So obviously COVID-19 just came only to exacerbate those, average Cuban real life struggles. Then you have like 2 or 3 generations of young Cubans that have been born and raised in this total hopelessness. Like, I have been born and condemned to be in a place where I have no future. Again, what else do I got to lose? You have that. And then I think that there is like a few key components who are quite different from when I was in Cuba back before 2001. Number one is the access to internet and to social media that, granted, is still censored by the government, is controlled by them. I mean, we have data posted all over Twitter saying that, for example, in the past 48 hours, Etexa, which is the government-controlled company that provides phone and internet services, has basically shut down the internet access for 12 hours in a row. Even though within those very constrained circumstances, young Cubans are now able to see what's going on in the rest of the world. They're able to see with their own eyes from the smartphones that they're holding on their hands. They're able to see that there is a life, a hope, and a future outside the plantation where they have been born. So that plays a key role on it too. And I think that the fact that the number of people that took off the streets, that's a turning point. That's unprecedented. It is the first time in the almost 63 years that the communist dictatorship have been in power in Cuba that something like this happened at the same time all over the island. So I think it has been a combination of all those factors what prompted what started to happen in San Antonio de los Baños yesterday in Cuba.
So everything's kind of coming together in this perfect storm, and all of a sudden the whole world is watching, right? And so what has been the reaction of, what's his name? He's the first President Miguel Diaz-Canel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Diaz-Canel, yes. Yeah, like,
right, in 60 years.
We don't even know who that guy was like a couple of years ago. So yeah, he's a puppet that has been unelectedly appointed as the president of the plantation. There are several things happen with here. Like number one, like the most concerning one, and I think that the one that the corporate media and the mainstream media, not only in the United States but all over the world, it's like either ignoring on purpose or failing to point, is that this guy called for a civil war between Cubans yesterday on live TV. Like he literally said that the order to shoot and the order to fight has been given. So you have this person coming out of nowhere that nobody knows who really is, unelected, appointed by Raul Castro, because again, we're talking about a plantation that is being inherited with 11 million of a slave on it, like if it was just like another property. And this guy had the guts to come and say on live TV, on top of blaming everything on the embargo and the Yankees and the Americans and everybody and their mother, because everything that happens in Cuba is never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. On top of that, to add insult to injury, then this guy calls on live TV, calls for a civil confrontation between Cubans. And I think that this is like unprecedented in the sense that even the most or the brightest minds of foreign policy in the United States are really not computing properly what the implications of this happening just 90 miles south of Florida. And I think that's a big thing, because it means basically, and this is where we Cubans that are in the United States or anywhere else in the world outside of Cuba, we feel that we're trapped between a rock and a hard place, because this means that the government is planning and is ready to go with a full-blown massacre, like a massacre and a genocide in the hands of the Cuban government is brewing 90 miles south of Florida. And sadly, not many people have been paying a lot of attention to it, except probably in the last few hours since we have been putting all this out in social media and the news.
Right. It's very scary. I mean, what do you see happening? Like what if you had to guess what's going to happen in the next 48 hours? What do you think? Do you think the people are going to cave and go back home, or is this going to
I don't know, Annette. That's the $1 million question. I mean, we all want to, again, this is something that have never happened before in Cuba. So that makes it itself like a wild card. It can go anywhere. We are talking about a country where last night, the minute the sun went down, the Cuban government started to put the anti-riot special forces out on the streets. They cut the power, they cut the internet, they put all these repressive police forces out, and they start dragging people out of their houses when they were snitched out or suspected to having participated in the protests during the day. So again, it can go either way. I want to believe that this is going to be a process similar to, like, this is going to be like the Caribbean version of the Velvet Revolution that we saw in Eastern Europe when the Berlin Wall came down and the entire Eastern communist bloc fall down on their own crumbles and on their own failure and misery. I want to believe that, because even though I have been one of the lucky ones that got out, I don't want to see a bloodbath on my homeland. I still have friends, families, relatives, ex-coworkers, ex-classmates, people that I care about. And nobody wants that for their loved one or the people that you care about. So I want to believe that it's going to be something like that. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. Granted, after yesterday's, they kind of like wrap out most of the several dissident groups on the island were calling for a national strike. They were calling for Diaz-Canel, which is the actual president, to quit, to leave. Newsflash to the American media: Cubans are not asking for vaccines, they're asking for freaking freedom, as hard as believe that can be, right?
Isn't that funny? That's the first thing that you started seeing out of like the State Department, you know?
I know, it's like, which dimension of the matrix are you all living, you know?
People don't go out to the streets to protest for a vaccine. They just don't. And not
Exactly. Yeah.
I think one of the scary things, and a lot of people don't realize, is that Cubans don't have a Second Amendment right to bear arms. And so you have an unarmed populace against an armed authoritarian government.
It's literally David against Goliath. Yeah, that's
what
we're talking about.
That's always very scary. However, you do have numbers in their favor. So there is the potential to maybe take over an armory or something, you know, and for the people to maybe to get access to guns. The military, if they can take over, it seems like a long shot, but it would certainly be wonderful. I mean, what are the other options? I don't see another country coming in to help. The Biden administration is certainly not going to put boots on the ground in Cuba.
Oh, no. Mm-mm. They could care less about having a whole genocide happening there in the next 72 hours. Yeah. So again, it's a very complex situation, especially because this is unprecedented. So we have had reports, for example, in Palma, Soriano, and Santiago de Cuba, which are the eastern provinces or the island, the ones that are closer to Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, where many of the police officers actually join at the protest. They removed their shirts. They kind of like joined the people that were marching. We have had, again, a lot of things are very volatile now coming out of there. We try to double check our sources, but a lot of things are going to be, this is like going to be like a very ever-changing situation. A lot of people are saying that the young kids that are being drafted on the mandatory military service, they are the ones being loaded on the trucks to go on the streets and then beat up people that are protesting. But then at the same time, we have like filter videos of those kids telling their families abroad or either in the United States or anywhere else, telling them, you know what, mom, dad, cousin, whatever, if they ask me to go in the truck, I go in, but I'm not going to beat up anybody. The minute I come down of that truck, I'm going to remove the shirt of my uniform. I'm going to try to blend in the crowd, and I am not going to beat up anybody. So you have like a whole mix of things. We have a lot of humanitarian groups and organizations here in the United States, like Human Rights Watch groups and all that, making these pleas and these calls to the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias, the Cuban military, the Cuban army, and asking them, you know, literally begging and pleading to them, do not shoot your countrymen. Just, you know, this is a historical moment in life. Make sure that you choose your side, you know, wisely. So it's so hard. It's a very, very hard place to be. I mean, from any analyst standpoint, it's very hard to predict. And from anybody that has any skin on the game, like most of us Cuban in exile have, is twice heartbreaking. Because we are the lucky ones that are out. And we feel guilty that there is only so much that we can do. We feel that we have our hands tied, that we can only serve as their relay on the media, on places like this, like your show, like social media, or anywhere else, to be able to translate their messages, to share their videos, to share their testimonies. But there is so much little that we can do when we know that they're having a crisis, not only with the failure and the misery that they have been living for decades, but now after the COVID situation, you have the hospitals that were collapsing before are even worse now. You have the dead bodies from COVID-19 are out of the refrigeration places in the morgues because they don't have a space for that many people. And it's just I mean, it's a no-win situation on any angle that you look at it. There is a huge humanitarian and human rights crisis happening right now. But again, that doesn't justify mainstream media or people like those that put the headlines on the New York Times, which, by the way, have been carrying the water for Castro for decades now, and they finally were forced to cover the story. it doesn't justify them saying that we are on the streets and we're claiming vaccines, because that's not true.
Right.
I mean, there is no amount of pork clutching on Sunday Mass that is going to save the souls of those people from rotting in hell from doing that, or from the Bernie Sanders or the AOCs of these countries that are defending that misery and that disaster from the comfort of their first world life here in the United States.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch the paradox of Cubans taking to the streets now to protest and to demand freedom, whereas here in our country we have people trying very hard and are successfully taking us right down to that road. Like they want to turn us into Cuba. It's like, okay, this is a wake-up call for you right now, which is one of the reasons. Obviously we all care about Cuba, but we also care about America not becoming Cuba.
Yes.
So this is one of the reasons why so many of us need to keep this front and center. First of all, we want Cuba, we want the attention, the spotlight on Cuba. We want the whole world watching Cuba to see what happens. But secondly, we want to say, hey, people, communists, socialists, millennials that think socialism is great, take a look at Cuba. They're not in the streets because they want a vaccine. They're in the streets because they're starving and they're not free. They're tired of it.
Yeah.
They're tired of being stepped on. What was it in 1984? Every time I see protests, I think about the end where they say, it's the boot coming down on your throat again and again and again and again.
And again, over and over again. Yes.
And that's all they're being forced to. Okay, we know what I'm curious. Is there a part of you that wishes that you were there in Cuba right now on the ground protesting?
Oh, boy, you have no idea. I was just telling that to my mom last, and I'm like, I wish I could be a fly on the wall there. And then her mom's instinct kicks on right away, and she's like, no, I don't, because you'll probably be the first one in jail. And I'm like, okay. But yes, and then it's that kind of, that's what I was trying to explain when I mentioned before being like between a rock and a hard place. Because you have like these, okay, I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I am an American by choice right now. But it's like my heartstrings are still being pulled back there. Like you're still have that solidarity, and that you still know what they're going through. Again, back when I was in Cuba, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was no way that technology was on our side, but I still saw it when the Maleconazo happened in 1994, when the whole Elian Gonzalez crisis happened and I was still in Cuba, when the 13 de Marzo tugboat was sunk by orders of the Cuban government right there in the Havana harbor. And nobody knew about it because we didn't have that technology resources that we have right now. I mean, even with the censorship and all the controls the government have, there is always a way around. So it's a very hard place to do. I honestly don't wish that even on my worst enemy. Right. Because it's very, very hard to kind of like come to terms with what is the right thing to do or what is the right thing to say.
Mm-hmm. And I also have to point out that the protesters have been waving the American flag.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that funny how we just got past this Independence Day? July 4th was just last week. And, you know, what do you see on social media but some Black Lives Matter groups and other groups saying that the American flag is racist? Like, in my wildest dreams, I never would have thought, in my 52 years, I never would have thought that all of a sudden the American flag, which stands for freedom, would be racist. Well, obviously the Cubans don't think that, right?
because we don't take our freedom for granted, Annette. We were not born in what you guys were born. Mm-hmm. You know, the ones that were able to make it out, we do not take it for granted because we come from a place where we never had it before. Mm-hmm. Does that make us blind about it? Hell no. We're going to be calling the red flags red, you know, left and right until the day we die. But still, when you look at the big picture and I always say that perspective is a great equalizer. When you put it in perspective, yes, the American flag is still the beacon of freedom because you don't see I mean, the way that you see the transit, and I know we have talked about this before, you don't see Americans flooding places in homemade raft to go to live in Cuba and Venezuela and North Korea. It's actually the other way around. So, regardless of all the things that we need to solve in our nation nowadays, we are still the only hope. We are still the beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. And that's what the United States flag represents in movements, in organically, naturally, spontaneous protesting movement like this one happening in Cuba now. It's just like I was mentioning to someone earlier today. It's like the Hong Kong of the Caribbean. This is what we're witnessing right now in Cuba, and it's all over the island. And it's again something of very, very big historic significance. And again, whoever is choosing to turn a blind eye and choosing to look to the other side, I truly hope at some point they have to, answer to the creator whether they did the right thing or not.
That reminds me, one of the other reasons that I read that the economy is doing so poorly now is because Venezuela is in the ditch. And Venezuela used to help Cuba. And I know because, like I said, my sister served a mission there a long time ago. She regularly, like daily, receives pleas for money from her old friends in Venezuela. And so it's in complete disarray. And so the Cubans can't rely on Venezuela. Those things should be a very big beacon, a big warning to the people here who think socialism and communism is so great, because Venezuela used to be a successful country.
Yes.
Before they went communist. And Cuba used to be a successful country. My mom, I was talking to her today about it. She can remember 1959 when Castro came in and took over, where it used to be, Havana used to be a hot spot, clubs and everything. And it was a fun place to go.
It was like another Cancun or another Punta Cana until Castro took over. Yeah. And you know what? It's honestly, I really don't, I guess maybe we human beings are like the dumbest species on nature. Maybe we are the only ones in the whole animal kingdom that do not learn from our own mistakes, or we have very short memories. I honestly don't know. But again, it seems like a really big contradiction. And again, every time that you have a contradiction, everybody should check their premises. And it's very sad that most people in the United States and all over the world don't know that thought process. But it's a very big contradiction to see, for example, countries like Venezuela, which is the oil richest country in Latin America, and they don't have toilet paper. And up to 2 years ago, they were eating the stray dogs from the streets, which is exactly the same thing that happened in Cuba. And we warned them about it, and they didn't listen. And so what happened with Venezuela is that Cuba used to be a satellite of the Soviet Union, and the minute the whole communist bloc went down, then they needed to leash onto somebody else. So Venezuela became the next golden goose, if you would say, the same way that they are eyeing at Mexico with López Obrador right now, the same way that they tried in Bolivia until they were, the Bolivians were able to vote out the socialists that they had on the presidency. So it's like a precedent where history keeps repeating itself in Latin America. And then again, we're these stubborn animals in the animal kingdom that are willingly refusing to see our experiences from past history. And we're just too busy with our first world problems and our iPhones and overpriced Starbucks coffees to see the reality of what's going on around us in the world.
Well, and it seems to me like it's a willful ignorance, like we've talked about before, on the part of people who should know better. But also, obviously, in people like AOC and Bernie Sanders and other people that are constantly talking about how we need to socialize or whatever, it's a power grab. That's all it is. Because
absolutely,
we know that the top people there in Cuba, just like the top people in Venezuela and everywhere else, are living high on the hog. They've got the power, they've got the money, they've got everything that they could possibly want. It's all the little people. Same thing in North Korea. You know, the guys at the top
Mm-hmm.
are doing just fine, and they have all the power and all the money. So of course they're going to do everything they can to keep the status quo. It's the people down here who I don't know how they got there, but who, you know, once they get there are stuck because they're afraid of dying, you know, losing their jobs, losing their family, whatever, because they're all of a sudden stuck in the system.
Exactly.
You do get,
Yeah.
you don't have any power. So the whole point of us doing this program and you speaking out is to avoid this in America and in other countries. It's like people just don't want to see it. It's romanticized. Everyone should have free healthcare, free this, free that, free the other. But anything the country can give you, anything the government can give you, they can take away and then some. And then they can control you when they're giving you stuff. I don't know why people can't see that. People, look at Cuba, look at Venezuela. My friend has a Facebook post today, and he was talking about this, why people don't see it. And my snarky comment was, well, let's see, the Cubans, the North Koreans, the Soviet Union, all these other places that have tried communism, they just didn't do it right. But AOC, she knows how to do it.
Oh yeah, and Bernie Sanders knows too. Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's like I always say, is this like chronic, never-ending double standard where it's very easy to stand up and defend something from the comfort of your $1 million house in the first world because you don't have to live it or suffer it on your own back. So again, like the old Cubans saying or idiom says, is it is very easy to swim when you are out of the water.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think that what is there are many key points that are really important, I think, to put um, out in our audience regarding to what is going on in Cuba. Like number one is like it's only been what 48, 72 hours. Most of the dissidents and groups in Cuba are calling for actually for a national strike. They're calling for Diaz-Canel to quit and leave the country and let the Cuban people decide what they want to do with their country. Then we have like a lot of rumors and things that are not confirmed yet. Like we have rumors that the Havana airport has been closed down to incoming flights, that only flights are going out. Whether they're doing that under the umbrella of the COVID restrictions or not, that still remains to be seen. There have been posts on social media where people are saying that Diaz-Canel have been given an ultimatum whether he needs to leave the country or not, whether they have been private jets that have left from Eastern Cuba and flying straight to Venezuela and Argentina. We don't know if they have been the rats abandoning the sinking ship or if they're going to these countries to bring these gangs and these armed peoples so they can release them on the streets to increase the repression against the protesters, because that's exactly what the Cuban government did with Hugo Chavez and Maduro when this same situation was unfolding in Venezuela a couple of years ago. So whether it's one way or the other, it remains to be seen. I think it's very, very important for everybody and their mother to know that number one, what's going on in Cuba nowadays, it doesn't have anything to do with Cubans wanting more vaccines. They want freedom. They want freedom and they want the communist dictatorship and the tyrant to go away. And number two, and I'm sorry to burst the bubble of so many Americans that have bought into that propaganda for so many decades, what's going on in Cuba today doesn't have anything to do with the embargo of the restrictions established by the Helms-Burton legislation. Okay? I mean, if they were in such a dire necessity and in such a dire cash strapped situation because it's the fault of the United States, you tell me how then they're able to have these special forces with top of the line 2021 release anti-riot gear, be able to deploy all those resources in the streets in the dark of night in all the major cities in Cuba in a matter of hours. You tell me, and anybody again that have an iPhone on their hands today, the data from both the Cuban government and the United States government is readily available to look and see how they are like the top 5 trade partners right now. And the only restriction is that the Cuban government has to pay in cash. So no, I, for one, don't buy the whole excuse that is the fault of the embargo, because even if you want to draw a parallel with other foreign policy situations, like Taiwan has been embargoed by China for decades too. And can somebody dare to mention the difference between Taiwan current living situations and Cuba's current living situation? No, the only difference is that Taiwan is an open market economy with a capitalistic system and a free market system, and Cuba is a socialist dictatorship. So yeah, somebody's going to have to come up with a better excuse, because the one with embargo restrictions is not going to fly anymore. So that's number one. Number two, number three, and I think that is really important, and a lot of people have kind of like downplay this, probably because the whole live address was done in Spanish, and only a few of us have been translated and putting out that in social media in English. And it's like the call that Diaz-Canel did yesterday, that was some serious stuff. I mean, that man called for a civil war between Cubans right there on Cuban soil. If that is not the definition of a massacre waiting to happen, or a genocide in the hands of the communist dictatorship government waiting to happen, I don't know what it is. And I think that regardless of whether it's the United States or any other country administration they decide to do, the Cuban government is in a humanitarian and human rights crisis. And yes, they are, the Cuban people, I meant, they are 90 miles from Florida. So yeah, they should matter to the United States because they're too close to our country. And even above that, because there are moments in life where you really have to choose wisely whether you go with the right thing or the wrong one, and you got to live with it for the rest of your life. So I think that within that framework, what we're trying to do, the Cubans that are out of the island, what we're trying to do is that we're basically trying to become like human relays of what is happening on the island. We're trying to bridge that gap in the censorship and the communication lines, so we can translate into English or any other language their messages, like their testimonies, their videos, their pictures, what's going on. And I think that we are so privileged, Annette, like we really have nothing to lose here. They have everything at stake.
Yes.
They have, I mean, literally the other most important right and property that we have, which is our right to life and the property of our own body, is at stake there. We got nothing to lose behind the keyboards of our computers and our phones by just being on the right side of history and trying to help them, putting out this message and this plea for freedom out. I think it's just what any decent human being could do in a situation like this. Again, I think it's important to reiterate that nobody in Cuba or outside Cuba is asking for any like international conflict, military operation, or anything like that. Everybody needs to put those Jack Ryan stories out of the window right now. We are asking for the recognition of the Cuban people to be free to express what they believe. They're asking for the current government to quit and leave and let them to decide what they want to do. And they're actually pleading for help because there is a humanitarian crisis in the country. I mean,
if Red Cross or anybody is there where we can send money?
I haven't heard anything from the Red Cross. I do have friends in Mexico and other countries in Latin America that they have been putting together these aid boxes, like basically with the same treatment for COVID that they have been doing in Latin America, like with the ivermectin, the hydroxychloroquine, the zinc, and all that. They have been putting all this together so people can do the treatments at home before things get so bad that they have to end up in the hospital. They're putting together boxes with food, but they have no way to get it to the island. I have been reading today that a lot of people in South Florida has been asking, I'm not quite sure what's the US government regulation to it, but they have been asking for authorization to do like a humanitarian flotilla where people from, the Gulf Coast and South Florida can go in boats out to the whatever they are allowed to get in the island and bring food, bring medications and all that. but I haven't heard any response about it. So we are basically, I mean, our hands are tied. And then we know, first of all, the government has been for months mocking the COVID situation all over the world, saying that they have everything under control. And then now that, that they have like this literally crap show in their own country, now they're just like going mute. They obviously cannot handle what is happening on the island on their own. The World Health Organization offered vaccines to Cuba, and Diaz-Canel said, no, we don't need any of that. We have like our own, we're like the best. We're like the last Coca-Cola in the desert. While on social media, we are seeing people laying on the floors on plastic sheets on the hospitals and dead bodies out of the refrigerator chambers in the morgues because they're simply collapsing with the numbers and the numbers of daily positive cases and all that. So it's, again, it's a no-win situation. Like, we all want to help, but we actually do.
Regime, this is the same problem I see in Pakistan. People want to help, but you're afraid that anything you send there is going to end up in the hands of the corrupt bureaucrats or corrupt.
And that's the other thing. Anything that goes in donations, under the donations or humanitarian help or USAID help, which is, by the way, paid by American taxpayers, in case that somebody was wondering, to Cuba, it ends up in the hands of the government. Guess what they have been doing way back since I was there? They don't distribute those donations for free to the people, Annette. They put those on the dollar stores and they sell those in the stores where Cubans have to pay with hard currency. Those same Cubans, average Joes that do not get their salaries paid in hard currency. Right. So it's like the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of mankind. And then all over the countries and all over the world and all the people that are sending donations either don't see that or are refusing to see that, even though when the testimonies of what's really happening are all out in the open for everybody to see now.
Right. Okay, I have two questions I want to ask you before I let you go. I know you've had a really long day, really long few days. You are busy.
Yes.
Right now. Bless you for the work you're doing. Number one, what can we be doing? And for instance, you said that you and some other Cuban Americans are translating or forwarding information. Where can people find you on Twitter? Like if they wanted to follow you on Twitter,
Well, we're mostly, reaching on that on Twitter. The funny name for the handle is Galt's Cuban Mommy. It's like
M-A-M-I, right?
Yes, M-A-M-I.
Here, so you have to remember.
So it is
where's John Galt?
Yes, so it is CBNTA and then RMNP, like Rocky Mountain National Park. That's the handle. But then usually with the name is easier to get it. Is Galt's Cuban Mommy. So you can follow that. You can follow, and you can see that on my timeline. 14 y medio and Hemos Oído are two like website hubs where we get like all the reports for independent reporters and journalists in Cuba. They are sending all that information in Spanish, and then we translate it in English and we put out that information as well. I think that Cubanos por el Mundo is doing a really good work at the live coverage on Facebook and their Twitter of what's going on in the country. And I think the most important ones is follow the hashtags. Right. I think that let me see if I can see them here now.
Yeah, it's really blind. It's bright.
Yeah, it's so it's SOS Cuba.
Hashtag SOS Cuba, yes.
That's one. Mm-hmm. The second hashtag is Patria
y Vida.
Which is the
RIA, capital Y, Vida, which means country and life.
Yes, homeland and life. And the other one is Cuba Libre. And no, we're not talking about the drink. We're talking about the country.
Hashtag Cuba Libre, which is CUBA, capital LIBRE.
So I think if you go through those three, I mean, they have been trending on Twitter, believe it or not, in the, since yesterday. I think that will give everybody a really good idea of what are those reports that are coming out from Cuba. Some stuff it's being translated automatically with the Google Translate feature that you have on Twitter. Some of them, us, we are doing the translation of it. And you know what? Honestly, sometimes, and the images and the video really don't need any comments. They don't need any
I've watched
captions.
several today, and they really speak for themselves. I mean,
Exactly.
never seen anything like that. Well, every time you see pictures of Cuba, there are a few people out on the street, pushing their carts or whatever, but I mean, you look at these pictures, these images and videos.
This is massive.
Thousands of people out on the street. And it's so obviously Cuba. Cuba has a very distinct look, with the pink buildings and things. It's really something to behold. People need to get on to social media if they haven't and look at these images. And so it seems like one of the most important things we can do is for us to get onto social media and use those hashtags and share those stories so that it stays front and center. It seems like Governor DeSantis, Senator Cruz.
Oh, many people like the GOP leadership, Nikki Haley, Kristi Noem is the governor of one of the Dakotas. There are so many people that have come out publicly, like Gina Carano of all of them. There's so many artists and so many influencers that have been coming out. And we are so deeply, deeply grateful for that because they have big audiences. And like I was saying before, when we are out of it, like the only thing that we can do is actually lending our voice to those that are being silenced now. Lending our channels and our audiences to those that are now voiceless because of a government repression being clamped down.
We're going to amplify their voices. We're going to take those voices and amplify them times a million so that they are heard around the world and they're not forgotten. Marco Rubio, he's another one that's obviously been very outspoken. His family's from Cuba. The last thing I wanted to ask you, and this is obviously kind of pure guesswork, but just having come from Cuba, and so being intimately familiar with the island and the people, if this thing goes well and, a strike works and what's his name, the president,
Diaz-Canel. Yeah, we have another word to refer to him in Spanish, but it's not very ladylike. So let's just keep it at his last name.
So let's just say he did leave and the rats are deserting the sinking ship and the people are left to govern themselves. Do you think that the Cuban people can do it? Do you think that they can organize and a democratic government quickly, or is it going to fall into chaos? And they put in another.
I absolutely believe they can do that, and I think that even whoever wants to even glance at Cuban history can see that we have done it before. So I see absolutely no reason why we cannot do it now. Is it going to happen overnight? Probably not. It's probably going to be a process. It's probably going to be something of what we have seen again, like in Eastern Europe, happening with that process of that transition, where you're still going to have maybe some people like remnants from the communist elite that, want to hold on into power. There's going to be a lot of corruption. You name it, it's going to be a process. It's probably going to take, quite a few decades to get back in track. But yeah, of course, I think the Cuban people can do it. Like, there is nothing that we yearn more than freedom and to be able to have, democracy in a sense, and to have a respect for individual rights. And despite how many different groups of dissidents we have on the island right now, the one common point that everybody has is that they want to restore the 1940 constitution in Cuba. And believe it or not, back then in that island in the Caribbean, they held a constitutional process or Congress. And when we came out with the 1940 Constitution, it was modeled after the United States Constitution.
I was going to say,
if there is no,
we could give them a template.
No, we already got that template. And there is no doubt why it was one of the first things that Castro scratched off from the books when he took over, because the 1940 Constitution was based on inalienable individual rights, a very limited government, a representative government, and a yearly respect for individual rights, freedom of speech, and individual private property. Nothing to do with the whole collectivization and central planning monster that they have imposed on the island for the last 62 years. So yeah, my hope is that will come to Cuba. I mean, granted, it's not going to happen overnight, but I believe that there is like 11 million Cubans on the island and close to 2.5 millions in exile. The whole economical infrastructure rebuild is going to be an easy one, because that once that you have a constitutional guarantee that you have a respect to private property and individual rights, going there and invest in rebuilding the country is going to be the easy part. So yeah, I absolutely have faith in my countrymen and women that they're going to be able to rebuild the country where I was born. And I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it, but yeah, I do hope that that's what is, in line for the future of Cuba. Because again, it has reached rock bottom. There is nowhere else worse where it can go right now.
Awesome. Well, we will be watching it very closely. And I'm going to ask everyone to remember Cuba in their prayers regularly. And then to get up and go on to social media and just repost and hashtag the heck out of this. And then let's just hope that at some point, maybe the Red Cross or someone can come in that will be allowed in, that we can direct some money so to help these people eat while they're going through all this. So let's do the most that we can for Cuba. And I'm so grateful that you're out there. And I know there are a lot of voices like you. And I really appreciate all the effort you're putting into all the time. And I mean, I know you've got to be just tired by now for all the shows going on and everything. So we really appreciate you. And I love the flag behind you. And I
got my flag and I got my hashtags. And like you were saying, like, please send all the prayers and the pixie dust that you can have our way. Yes. I was very moved earlier today when I saw a video from a small town in Eastern Havana called Bejucal, where before people went out to the streets, because it's very curious that all this started in small rural areas in Cuba. Granted, those are the areas where people are being hit the most by everything that could go wrong. And it was very moving to see these people, like all the protesters, they stopped in the local church, and then the priest got out the Virgen de la Caridad, which is the equivalent of the Virgin Mary. The Virgen de la Caridad is the saint patron of Cuba. And they say the prayer and they bless those protesters before they went on the streets to face armed forces, anti-riot people with long rifles, with all kind of gear to literally kill them on the streets. And we're seeing the videos of people shot. There have been reports of injuries, of dead people and all that. So when you see something like that, I mean, it really pulls the heartstrings in ways that not many people really can relate to.
Well, we are going to continue praying for Cuba, and we'll keep your family and your friends in mind as we do that are still there in Cuba. And listeners, please go on and share the heck out of these stories, and go and follow Mylene on Twitter with the name was Galt Cuban.
Yes.
Mommy, M-A.
Yes.
Go find her. I found her that way. So.
Yes, please. Just help us spread the word. That's the only plea that we have. Help us be the voice of those that are being shut down right now in Cuba. And I appreciate again, Annette, your time.
And you just froze up. So I am going to go ahead and sign off because it doesn't look like it's unfreezing. So thank you all for listening. Feel free to comment on this or reach out to me at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com. If you want me to pass on a message to Mylene, I will do that. And so, you're unfrozen. Good.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you all for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.